I think most of us can agree that it is oftentimes frustrating to be a Bulls fan, at least ever since 1998 when the Bulls won their last championship. Of course, the Bulls have had their ups and downs since then. We had a solid team in the mid-2000s that were able to make a couple of playoff runs under Scott Skiles, and then of course the D Rose era of the early 2010s where it looked like they were on a path to bringing a championship back to Chicago until of course Derrick Rose got injured in the 2012 playoffs. And ever since then, the team has just never really recovered, albeit some mild success post-Rose injury under Jimmy Butler. And after the front office traded Jimmy Butler and entered into rebuild mode where we find ourselves today, the Bulls haven't seen the playoffs since. Now, throughout this time period, we oftentimes blame the front office, the coaching staff, the players, hell, even the training staff for when players continue to get injured. But there's often one element of the Bulls organization that tends to be overlooked when it comes to the performance of the franchise, and that is the Bulls ownership, specifically Jerry Reinsdorf, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Guys, be sure to check out my last two videos. They'll be on the end screen of this one. I discussed in those videos who I believed will be staying with the Bulls this offseason, who will be brought in via free agency or trades. Would love to hear your guys' thoughts on the scenarios that I suggested. Let me know in the comments in those videos. Anyway, I may be alone in this opinion, but for me personally, I think one of the more frustrating things of being a Bulls fan is that the Chicago Bulls as a franchise oftentimes act like they are a small market team. For the most part, post-Jordan and D Rose era really remaining irrelevant despite being one of the biggest sports market in the nation. You rarely see any big free agent moves or trades that happen from the Bulls, with the exception of this year, which I'll discuss in a bit. And then of course you rarely see them breaking the bank and going deep into the luxury tax in order to not just continue to be a bad team to a mediocre team. I mean, yes, in the NBA, like in baseball, the league has a salary cap, so there's only so much that you can spend and work with as a result, but there are also exceptions and parameters in place that enables teams to get creative in going over the cap, but paying a tax as a result of it, known as a luxury tax, to go over the salary cap. Essentially, a fee is assessed for every dollar that is over the cap. Now, for some franchises, particularly big market teams, they don't mind going over the cap and into the luxury tax because their team is able to generate more revenue than most small market teams, and that return on investment typically exceeds the small amount. And when I say small amount, that's relative because it's generally millions of dollars, but that small amount, that return that they get outweighs the cost of going into the luxury tax, because the more money you spend, generally the higher quality talent you can bring into your team as a result. Now, the assumption among most fans anyway, myself included, is that the Bulls owners are cheap, in that they are unwilling to cough up the money to actually make these strong moves that allow for the team to be relevant in a big market in the NBA. And I mentioned this in one of my recent hot takes videos. Part of the reason for that is the Reinsdorfs don't really have much of an incentive to spend all that much money when it comes to the Bulls payroll. The Bulls are one of the most profitable teams in the league. They always have the highest attendance rates, and because of Michael Jordan, the Bulls have also become a global brand ever since the 90s. So even when the Bulls are doing poorly, if they're one of the worst teams in the league, they're still making the Reinsdorfs a lot of money, more money than most teams throughout the NBA. So from their view, and again, this is just me speculating, why pay more when the team is still making you considerable money anyway? It's a very safe and lazy approach, knowing that you're gonna make money regardless. Why spend more in reality when it's likely not going to generate that much more in return? Now, although Bulls ownership has, without a doubt, more often than not gone the cheap route, you would be surprised to know that most seasons, at least in recent years, they have in fact gone over the salary cap and into the luxury tax, not by much, but slightly over. That even includes this season. However, just because they have slightly gone over the salary cap and into the luxury tax, when you actually compare how much their payroll is relative to the league as a whole, the numbers show you that the owners are more cheap than they are willing to spend money. For example, in 2011, the season that Derrick Rose won the MVP, the Bulls were 27th out of 30 teams in highest payroll. So they had the third lowest payroll in the entire league for a team that was a contending team in one of the biggest markets in sports. Now, that did change given the fact that in 2012, they offered Rose a max contract extension. The Bulls then jumped up to 10th in the league in payroll. And then after the dynasty was broken up, They had the lowest payroll among the whole league in 1999, the second lowest payroll in 2000 and in 2001, and then also the third lowest in 2002 and 2003. Again, all very bad years for the Bulls, some of the worst that they've had in their franchise history. This season, they were actually 15th in payroll among the league, right behind the Minnesota Timberwolves. And aside from that, I mean, we all saw The Last Dance and how stingy they were with Scottie Pippen and not letting him go back and renegotiate his contract, right? His salary, after it was clear that he was a star in his own right. And really, after MJ retired for the first time to go play baseball, Scottie was the best player and leader on that team. And he was getting a little over $2 million a year, which was in the hundreds in terms of top player salaries in the league. What bothers me more, though, is the fact that the owners have, really up until this season, they've really just been stingy with the executive and coaching staff and not necessarily always the players. I mean, the fact that they held on to Garpax for that long without making a change still boggles my mind. And on top of that, you know, we can blame the front office for a lot of the decisions and transactions that have been made over the years, but at the end of the day, we all know the owners are very much involved in what moves are being made. So when they fired Tom Thibodeau and gave Fred Hoiberg a 5-year contract at $5 million a year, which he had no business in getting that long-term of a contract from the get-go for a coach that had no head coaching experience in the NBA. But from their view, well, $5 million a year isn't all that much for a coach. Let's sign him up for the long haul. Of course, they soon realized that he wasn't fit to be an NBA coach, and rather than signing him to a short-term deal to where they would have had to, you know, have a little more flexibility and not guaranteeing him so much money over the course of so many seasons, well, now they had to pay for the last 2 years of his contract and pay whichever new coach they chose to bring in after firing him. So they made a boneheaded decision of replacing him with Jim Boylen as an interim coach and then extended him, not because he was a good coach. I don't even think the front office or ownership, as dumb as they were, that they felt Boylen was going to be a good head coach for this team. But no, they offered him an extension because it was super cheap. Boylen was one of the lowest paid coaches in the league. And why do that and not go after a quality coach? Well, because you're paying two coaches now, one that you just fired in Fred Hoiberg, and then the other on a cheap deal. You're essentially getting two coaches for the price of one. Now, when Arturas finally came in, I think most people expected that he would fire Jim Boylen instantly because the owners made it clear that they were going to give him the level of autonomy that he wanted rather than being more controlling like they were with Garpax. But then Arturas didn't fire Boylen right away. That, you know, he wanted to give him a fair chance, and the whole thing kind of started getting a little fishy that the owners were wanting to hold on to Boylen a little longer, at least until his contract expired, so they, again, wouldn't have to pay for two coaches as they just finished paying off Hoiberg's contract. Well, luckily, it looks like the ownership finally is starting to relinquish some control and letting the new front office do what they want, because they fired Boylen, replaced him with a more reputable coach, a more expensive coach, and the moves at the trade deadline. I can guarantee you, if the owners had the ultimate say, that would not have been made, because it would have been they would have seen it as to be too risky, bringing in a 30-year-old on a big contract and giving away draft picks, which can get you players on much cheaper deals. The other thing that really bothers me about the Bulls owners is the fact that they were never really that big of basketball fans. Jerry Reinsdorf was always known to be a huge baseball fan, and when he made a lot of money selling a company that he built in the 80s, it was, you know, only going to be a matter of time before he had actually purchased a team in Major League Baseball, which he ultimately did in 1981, purchasing the White Sox. And then just 4 years later, he purchased the majority stake in the Chicago Bulls and still owns 60% of the Bulls to this day. And really, throughout his tenure in owning both teams, it has been very clear to his closest family and friends that he has always preferred baseball to basketball. Not saying that he prefers the White Sox to the Bulls, but that he likes the sport of baseball more so than basketball, which that's totally fine. Everyone has their preferences, but don't be lazy in the manner that you approach your basketball team that you own. Fans want to see an owner that is fully invested, passionate, and willing to spend money to make their team the best team in the league, similar to what you would see from a Mark Cuban or a Jerry Buss before he passed away. Now, I will say that I was very surprised when the owners finally decided to part ways with Garpax and bring in Arturas Karnisovas and Mark Eversley, and thus far it appears that they have been open to them making substantial and aggressive moves, given what we had seen at the trade deadline compared to what we would have seen potentially last season. And hopefully this means that the Chicago Bulls can finally start acting like a big market team and not operating like they're the Sacramento Kings or the Minnesota Timberwolves. This is Chicago, one of the biggest sports markets in the world. Spend the money necessary to make it a relevant franchise. Now, I would like to think this, and I think that things are trending in the right direction with the new front office, despite the disappointing season that we had this year. But even with things trending upward, I do still feel that without a change in ownership, with the Reinsdorf selling their stake to a new owner, an owner that is actually passionate about the Bulls, a new owner that actually understands the game of basketball. Until then, I'll be honest, I do have my doubts about the Bulls ever getting back to the glory days until that change is made. But let me know in the comments what you guys think though. Do you think the owners should be held more accountable for the team struggles over, say, the front office, and really the previous front office when I'm referring to that? Let me know in the comments, and guys, as always, be sure to subscribe as I post daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I will catch you in the next one.